Hey there, Spooky Reads fans. Let's talk about Mad Scientist. So I have a love for Mad Scientist. I think I've loved them ever since the concept first occurred to me, probably from watching Bugs Bunny, of all things. Mad Scientists have been a big part of superhero lore, and I write superhero novels with a mad scientist at the core. And they're also right there in the middle of gothic horror and things like Frankenstein. But tonight I'm going to talk about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So I actually only read this kind of recently. It's one of those stories that I never got around to reading, but still already knew, because how do you not know Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, right? Or Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, as I've also heard it pronounced. And I mentioned Bugs Bunny already. I think that might be the first time I saw a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde story, was the Bugs Bunny version of things. I've seen, of course, several movie versions, a television series, all kinds of things in between. So when I finally got around to reading the book, it wasn't that I didn't know what was going to happen. What was interesting about the book is that it's mostly told kind of from the side. Like, you're not in first person. You're not watching it from the doctor's perspective for the most part. Instead, you're seeing his friends notice that something is weird. And people are not able to get to Dr. Jekyll. And they can't figure out what's going on. And they find out that Dr. Jekyll has this strange relationship with this other man named Mr. Hyde. And they're trying to figure that out. But that whole famous scene, where he has the vial and he drinks it and he has a big transformation and we watch it, that doesn't really feature in the book until nearly the end. So you kind of get the story from several different perspectives, and like a lot of stories of its time, it's also got found pieces in it, like a letter from Dr. Jekyll that's sent to another friend and that kind of thing. It's something I'm playing with, and something I'm writing myself, with the idea that this lends a kind of veracity to the story, almost like in urban legends when somebody can tell you this happened to their uncle or something like that. It makes it feel a little more real, that frame. So the piece I want to read is from nearly the end of the book. I'm not too worried about spoilers in this one because, like I said, everybody knows this story even if they've never read this story. So the final section of the book is called Henry Jekyll's Full Statement of the Case. And it's supposed to be, kind of an accounting that he left. So at the beginning, he's talking about kind of his philosophy. And I think most people are pretty familiar with that he thought that he could maybe eliminate the bad in people, right? He'd separate it out. So that was kind of the mad science idea that got him started. So I'm going to read the part where he talks about his experiment itself. I hesitated long before I put this theory to the test of practice. I knew well that I risked death, for any drug that so potently controlled and shook the very fortress of identity might, by the least scruple of an overdose or the least inopportunity in the moment of exhibition, utterly blot out that immaterial tabernacle which I looked to it to change. But the temptation of a discovery so singular and profound at last overcame my suggestions of alarm. I had long since prepared my tincture. I purchased at once from a firm of wholesale chemists a large quantity of a particular salt, which I knew from my experiments to be the last ingredient required. And late one accursed night I compounded the elements, watched them boil, and smoked together in the glass, and when the ebullition had subsided, with a strong glow of courage, drank off the potion. The most racking pains succeeded, a grinding in the bones, deadly nausea, and a horror of the spirit that cannot be exceeded at the hour of birth or death. Then these agonies began swiftly to subside, and I came to myself as if out of a great sickness. There was something strange in my sensations, something incredibly new, and from its very novelty, incredibly sweet. I felt younger, lighter, happier in body. Within Within, I was conscious of heady recklessness, a current of disordered sensual images running like a mill race in my fancy, a solution of the bonds of obligation, an unknown but not an innocent freedom of the soul. I knew myself, at the first breath of this new life, to be more wicked, tenfold more wicked, sold a slave to my original evil, and the thought in that moment braced and delighted me like wine. I stretched out my hands, exulting in the freshness of these sensations, and in the act, I was suddenly aware that I had lost my stature. There was no mirror at that date in my room. That which stands beside me as I write was brought there later on, and for the purpose of those transformations. The night, however, was far gone into the morning. The morning, black as it was nearly ripe for the conception of the day. The inmates of my house were locked in the most rigorous hours of slumber, and I, determined, flushed as I was, with hope and triumph, to venture in my new shape as far as to my bedroom. I crossed the yard, wherein the constellations looked down upon me. I could have thought with wonder the first creature of that sort that their unsleeping vigilance had yet disclosed to them. I stole through the corridors a stranger in my own house, and coming to my room, I saw for the first time the appearance of Edward Hyde. I must here speak by theory alone, saying not that which I know, but that which I suppose to be the most probable. The evil side of my nature, to which I had now transferred the stamping efficacy, was less robust and less developed than the good which I had just deposed. Again, in the course of my life, which had been, after all, 9/10 a life of effort, virtue, and control, it had been much less exercised and much less exhausted. And hence, as I think, it came about that Edward Hyde was so much smaller, slighter, and younger than Henry Jekyll. Even as good shone upon the countenance of one, evil was written broadly and plainly on the face of the other. Evil, besides, which I must still believe to be the lethal side of man, had left on that body an imprint of deformity and decay. And yet, when I looked upon that ugly idol in the glass, I was conscious of no repugnance, rather of a leap of welcome. This, too, was myself. So I'll stop there. I think when Jekyll does finally talk for himself here at the end, it's just so right there in what's become the trope of mad science, right? Where he's so fully lost in the idea that he can't think about consequences, and he doesn't see the narcissism of it at all. He's like, well, you know, of course, I'm a genius, and therefore I should do these things. And I guess that's why I can never be a mad scientist, because I cannot take myself quite that seriously. So, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, one of the earliest mad scientists I can remember from my life, even if I didn't read the book until much later. Thanks for reading with me.